Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our British Water Thought Leadership Series, Talking on Water. My name's Mark Fletcher, and I'm the current British Water Chair. I have with me today Sharon Darcy, the Chair of the Linear Infrastructure Planning Panel, or LIPP, who's kindly agreed to an interview to share across the water sector. So good afternoon, Sharon, and welcome.
Good afternoon, Mark. It's good to be here.
Oh, well, good to have you. So in terms of the outline for the interview, I'm going to ask a few questions and Sharon can then share her thoughts. We might have some follow-up for clarification, we'll see how it goes, but I hope you're all suitably relaxed so we can make a start. So first of all, what are your priorities for the Linear Infrastructure Planning Panel, or LIPP?
Well, the Linear Infrastructure Planning Panel, and I'll call it LIPP going forward because it's a bit of a mouthful.
It is.
It's a long one. Was set up about 18 months ago to develop good practice in the use of new tools and approaches in planning linear infrastructure. So new tools and approaches, we looked at all sorts of things, but we primarily looked at new technologies, but we absolutely recognised that other methods and face-to-face methods of planning are very important. And we looked at linear infrastructure, so water transfer schemes, things like that, energy transmission lines, distribution lines, because those can often be the most difficult things in planning. And the priorities were really to bring together a group of people who had expertise in this area from across different sectors. So a group of people who wouldn't normally be in the same room together, because we thought that they would have tremendous inputs. So we had people like Paul Hickey, the MD of Rapid at Ofwat, Margaret Reed, the head of policy at the National Infrastructure Commission. But we also had some of the more challenging voices in the area who've opposed infrastructure schemes, because we thought it was really important to hear their voices, and people from different sectors. And we wanted to develop good practice in the area, so really learning across sector, cross project, cross portfolio.
That's music to my ears, and they're very good people you're working with. I know them. So how could British Water help to promote the work of the LIPP?
Well, we produced a white paper last year, which is available, and we can put a link out with this recording. So it would be great if you could share that with your members. And that sets out the work that we did over the last 18 months. So it looks at the deep dives that we did in terms of how new tools and approaches can help with engagement in infrastructure projects, which many of your members, I think, will be very interested in. It looks at issues around data for infrastructure projects, so social, environmental, economic data, what good practice looks like there. And it looks around how, when you have new technologies, particularly things like AI, you can ensure that that's as trustworthy as possible. So what does trustworthy AI look like? What's good practice there? So the first thing you could do is really share the white paper. The second thing you could do is mechanisms like the LIPP don't happen on their own. They only work if they have funding and if there's support. So when you have a good collaboration and you have a collaborative mechanism like the LIPP, it's really important that that's funded properly. So we're looking for funding partners to support the work of the LIPP and its follow-on organisation, where we've started to reach out to international partners and look at international learning between different infrastructure sectors. And that's what we've put together in terms of our new Smart Permitting International Forum. And it would be great if anybody wanted to get involved in that and particularly fund it, to get in touch.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. That gives us some opportunities that we'll get out there through this. So we'll see how that goes. So we're now seeing some of the major direct procurement for customers, or DPC schemes progressing, like HARP and CESRO. How much of an opportunity do you think this is for British Water members? And how can the LIPP help in the approach to delivery?
Well, it's an absolutely massive opportunity. So, of the 30 major projects that were highlighted in the final determinations for Ofwat's last price review, I think 27, nearly all of them were either DPC projects, direct procurement for customers, or the SIPRA projects, and I'll just read it out, specified infrastructure project regulations projects. So they nearly all fall into this category. And that's a total, in terms of total asset life of TOTEX, of just shy of £50 billion. So this is a massive investment programme for our environment here in the UK, for customers up and down the UK and communities, people who love and use rivers and depend on water resources. So British Water has a real opportunity to shape and influence that programme and to be an active part in delivering it. But what I really would point out is when you look at that list of 30 different projects, 7 of the biggest projects, representing over half of that amount, are due to start in the period 2028 to 2031. We haven't got much time, so we need to get much better at how we do these projects if we're going to be able to deliver that whole portfolio.
So it's very timely that we're having this conversation, I think.
It is.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Well, so thanks for that. I think that that'll really help our members get a sense of the opportunity if they haven't already. But from your perspective, maybe what the 2 or 3 most pressing challenges facing the water sector today, and how do you think LIPP is sort of leading the way to address them?
Well, I think the first one is another one that your members will be very familiar with, and that's the stretch of the supply chain. To deliver this volume of projects in this really tight timetable is really difficult. We know that in the UK water sector, we've got a largely ageing workforce. I think a fifth of members of the workforce are due to retire in the next decade. We know it's largely males still. So we're not fishing in the full pool of talent in terms of younger people, people from different backgrounds as we could. And that really matters because it's not just an issue around shortages of construction skills. We're also facing shortages of skills in terms of cyber, digital, planning. And we saw in our LIPP work, really environmental skills, such as ecologists. Shortages of those skills can hold things up. And we know in other sectors, for example, in the energy sector, the government has really upped the ante in terms of their approach there. And we need the same sort of approach in the water sector. So that's definitely one set of issues.
Yeah.
I think the second set of issues is that the planning system, and by that I mean particularly the spatial planning system, isn't really fit for purpose for this massive range of projects we need to deliver. The government has recognised that, and we know that there are moves in train with the Planning and Infrastructure Bill and the infrastructure strategy that the Treasury are going to produce this summer. But there is a lot of work to do. And I think everybody always knows the devil's in the detail. As we streamline planning processes to try and get them to be faster and more efficient, etc., we need to make sure we don't lose the sort of community engagement element of planning that is so important to maintain the social contract with the people who ultimately are going to be paying the bills for these new services.
Absolutely, and it helps it become a catalyst for growth, which is consistent with what the government's trying to achieve.
Exactly. But if I may, there's another 2 issues that I'd identify, and one is around investability. The fact that we've got 6 companies going to the Competition and Markets Authority on the basis of their price controls means that there is still concerns around the investability of the sector. So the majority of companies haven't gone, but there are concerns. And I think various analysts have identified around an 8 billion hole in allowed expenditure in the price control. So the investability of the sector does have a question mark over it. But that doesn't mean to say others aren't going full steam ahead with their projects. But of the top 7 largest projects in that portfolio of projects I mentioned at the beginning,
Yes.
all of those companies are going to the CMA. So that tells you something.
Yes.
That's quite sobering. And then lastly, in terms of another challenge, public acceptability of new schemes is clearly an issue. So these are members of the public communities who will be paying for the schemes through their bills. Many people don't want change in their communities, and they might have good reasons for that. So getting new ways to engage communities in these sorts of projects is vital. And the work of the Linear Infrastructure Planning Panel can help in all those areas.
Yeah.
So we could shall I go into one of them, or do you want to ask about a particular one?
No, you can go into one. I think that I'll give you a little bit of license because I think it'll tie into what you've just shared with us. So yeah, that'd be really helpful.
So when you think about the supply chain and you've got issues around capacity and capability, we can't expect people to do more with the limited resources we've got. So we need to have innovation. We need to get more efficient. And the Linear Infrastructure Planning Panel looked at various tools and technologies that can really speed up the planning process and can help increase certainty. So when you've got sort of capacity and capability constraints, doing things in different ways is really important. So for example, that might be around optioneering when you're looking at different routes. New technologies can help there. Or it might be around the community engagement element. New technologies can help people who don't want to go to a town hall on a wet Friday evening in February to engage in a process electronically and digitally. That doesn't mean to say you don't need other face-to-face mechanisms to engage, but new technologies can help. And new technologies as well, through better forecasting, etc., can really help reduce uncertainty.
Yeah, it's interesting because I saw the use of some new technologies with COVID for
Mm,
promoting schemes that were done through a sort of a virtual town hall. So
mm.
I think it's very timely. That's really good. So, what's your? It really ties into the last question. What's your view of the supply chain's role in helping around some of these future challenges?
Well, I think the supply chain can do various things. So first off, I think there is a tremendous source of insight and data in the supply chain. So how can we unlock that so we don't keep reinventing the wheel and having the same inefficient processes? And I can see you're nodding there, and I think you probably
Absolutely. Yeah.
experienced some of this.
Yeah.
But particularly things like environmental data. Why do we have to keep producing the same data again and again for a failed project, for a project that
Yeah.
can't get through a planning process? How can the supply chain share that data so that we can more quickly identify where the sticking points are when you're looking at consenting and better address those in a way which is satisfying for all different stakeholders? So I think that's one thing. I think secondly is around the collaboration point. But when we're looking at sort of building up the workforce, what can the supply chain do there in terms of apprenticeships, workforce planning, etc.? And again, I turn to the energy industry and the mechanisms in the government's new Clean Power 2030 action plan. Sounds very snappy again, but there's various things there that the government has committed to do with energy. I think that the water supply chain should be saying we need an equivalent of some of those mechanisms in terms of industry forums, etc., in the water sector.
I'd agree with that. I mean, there's definitely something about establishing common purpose for everybody involved in the projects, so that um, it's not being done to, it's being done with developing local workforce and all those sorts of things that can bring benefits to local communities as well. So that's really helpful. Okay,
And sorry if I could just say there, and that absolutely ties into the government's growth agenda. So we should be pushing at an open door.
I agree. So, so what collaborative opportunity exists between the LIPP and other stakeholders to protect the environment, uphold that social contract for the communities we serve, and how can these sort of be advanced? How can we sort of take those forward?
Well, I think it is really about sort of learning from each other in a far more proactive way. So there are good learning mechanisms in the water industry, but maybe we need to get better and more proactively use those. And the water sector also needs to learn from others. And I think that's particularly important when you get to issues around spatial planning, whereby the challenges you might face in a particular geography or place might be similar, whether you're a water company or an energy transmission company or a hydrogen network.
Yeah.
So getting that cross-sector learning is really important. And I think it can speed processes up, but also lead to better outcomes and better engagement with stakeholders who, many stakeholders don't care whether you're a water direct procurement for customer projects or an energy one. They just care about the places they live and have expertise and knowledge about the places they live. So the water sector working alongside those other sectors and sharing their knowledge, both in the UK and internationally, I think is a really important thing to do.
It's the best way to understand the local context, and it's always the context, I think, where things fall down, particularly when you take things from other industries. You always need a real good appreciation of the local issues and local context. So I'd agree with that. So that's been really comprehensive. Any other relevant comments on the LIPP? This is a sort of a bit of an open floor for you, but anything else that we've not covered? And it's been extremely rigorous and detailed, but anything else that we've not covered?
Well, I think what I would say is that the LIPP has really looked at how we need to get better in the water sector in terms of that sort of cross-sectoral planning. And that needs to start at home as well, in terms of water sector planning and how we bring together our water and our wastewater planning regimes. So we have DWMP, drainage wastewater management planning, WRMP. How do we bring those together into the holy grail of integrated water management? And again, there are opportunities there. We've got the Cunliffe Review, which is looking at some of the really big questions. So I would really encourage, from the work that LIPP's done, there is a real need to take that more strategic view. And I'd really encourage members of British Water to actively engage with those processes and share their expertise.
I agree, and I think it invites us to think about the governance around all that we're doing, both the scale of the projects and the challenges that we're facing, and maybe look at how that can tweaked or adjusted to be appropriate for the challenges that we now face. So that was really helpful and extremely informative, and has given us lots of places we can go and look for both guidance and for getting a bit closer to the understanding and the best practice that LIPP really was probably created to share. So many thanks, and we really welcome your willingness to engage and share your thoughts, your ideas, your concerns, but also your suggestions. And I think there's some real wisdom in there. We wish you every success with your role at LIPP, and on behalf of British Water would express our help and support going forward. If there's anything that we can do to help promote what LIPP are doing, please let us know. Thank you, and that concludes our interview. So it's a wrap. Thanks very much.
Thank you.